right, the time is 6:01. I'll call this special called work session of the mayor and council to order. Today is Wednesday, September 10th, 2014. All members of the mayor and council are present, along with a quorum of our Snellville Planning Commission. This is merely a work session. In our work sessions, we don't have public comment, we don't have discussion. Tonight's meeting is meant to be just a presentation by Miss Will, who is with us tonight. So, Miss Will, I will give the floor to you, please. Or Jason, you want to give some pre-remarks?
Take a second to introduce Megan. She specializes in land use planning and development regulations. She's currently the lead planner for CPWG, an engineering firm, and has also worked for Jacobs and JJ&G, which are local engineering firms here in Atlanta. She has a master's degree from Georgia Tech and has previously worked with the city on the adoption of their 2009 comprehensive plan.
Mayor, if I may just ask one question. We were given packages tonight of the zoning applications. Are these exactly the same as what was originally submitted, or have these changed in any way?
The Linwood development application was asked to revise some of their drawings and their application to further meet the intent of the ordinance, and those are the amended applications.
Okay, so this is the amendment. Okay,
yes,
thank you.
Yes, the most recent. Thank you.
And just for the record, I know Jason introduced, but will you say your name and also give us an address, please?
Oh, sure. Megan Will, 13031 Shoreside Court, Fort Myers, Florida. But I'm from Atlanta, so I'm not a Floridian. Not that that's a bad thing, but well, Jason had asked me to come before y'all tonight to provide information on the two rezoning applications that y'all have before you, the Linwood property and then the Brand property proposals. As you know, Brand has put their proposal somewhat on hold while they gather some more information, so I'll give a brief update on that, but I'll concentrate most of our discussion on the Linwood property, since that is the one moving forward most quickly. Before I do that, though, it was my understanding that there was some discussion about sort of how the comprehensive plan works with the zoning in the city and how sort of the whole process comes together. So I was going to give a little bit of a background and some information on that, so everyone can kind of know what steps we are that we're going to be going through. So on that note, I think probably the most important thing to remember about the interaction of the comp plan and the zoning ordinance are that the comp plan is a guide, the zoning ordinance is the law. So you can kind of think of one as being sort of more rigid than the other, if you will. Comp plans in Georgia are meant to be, a snapshot at a point in time to help cities determine how they're going to grow over the next 20 years. We plan for 20 years, but we update every 10 as mandated by the state here. And they are meant to be living documents. They are not documents that are set in stone. We often hear the phrase about, oh, well, the plan just got set on the shelf and it's collecting dust. And that's because they're not kept relevant to changing circumstances. Many jurisdictions in the Atlanta area, Gwinnett County being one of them, go through a yearly process of examining their plan, examining the current development trends, and what rezoning applications they've had over the year, and saying, okay, are we seeing some changes here that we need to go into our plan and address? With y'all's plan, of course, the last comp plan process began in 2006. We had it substantially completed towards the end of 2007, and then there's a lot of discussion with council, a lot of back and forth, and I think the final adoption date was 2009. So we're looking at a plan that's 5 years or so on, and of course that was prior to the 2010 census, so we were looking at 2000 census numbers. There's been a lot of change in the interim. When we started the comp plan process, everything was still going gangbusters in terms of the economy and growth in the Atlanta region. And then, well, we all know what's happened in the interim. So with that in mind, in terms of how the council can, review and act on requests to amend the comprehensive plan, it is certainly meant to be a living document and one that reflects current changing needs. So that is something that is certainly within the realm of appropriate for the council if they so wish to follow that path. Are there any kind of questions on that process before I go on? Sure.
Yeah, it was my understanding there was an update recently as required by DCA. Can you elaborate on that?
I'll look to Jason, but I believe that was your short-term work program. Those are required to be updated every 5 years by DCA. Again, most jurisdictions do them yearly because they're pretty much what feeds right into your capital improvements program. They're kind of where the rubber meets the road in terms of, we're going to repave these streets or, refurbish this park, those sorts of things. So that is kind of an update of our project list. It doesn't affect the goals, policies, objectives, vision of the plan, so to speak. So then moving on into rezoning applications. It is the general practice that rezoning applications should be consistent with the comprehensive plan. That's sort of the gold standard, if you will. So if a proposed development is not, could not be, under the current future land use designated for a property, then the process is to review the future land use, see if that warrants amendment, so that then a rezoning can be heard that would then create a new development on the property that would be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So we do the land use amendment first, followed on by a zoning amendment. So it's always the plan first, then the zoning is the gold standard way of doing things to keep things consistent. So with that in mind, I'll move over into the two proposals before you. I'll start with Brand, since that's going to be sort of the shorter one to discuss this evening. With that property, they have requested to amend the future land use plan to change the current designation from commercial to multifamily for the land use. And following on for that, it's a request for a rezoning from BG, general business, to RM, residential multifamily. So, within the commercial future land use, BG is a compliant, zoning category. Within the multifamily future land use, RM is a compliant zoning category. So that's how those sort of fit together. I can go over project specifics with you if you want me to recap them in terms of, the property and the unit numbers and those things, or if you're familiar with it, I can.
We all have a copy of the proposal, so unless council has a specific question.
Okay, just want to be respectful of y'all's time this evening. Okay, so we're all on the same page in terms of what they're proposing to do with the property in terms of taking a property that is currently vacant and putting a multifamily residential development on it. Very briefly, it's 252 units on a property that is roughly 30 acres. And it would be a mix of 3-story and 3 4-story split buildings. The unit mix is proposed 1, 2, 3 bedrooms, ranging in size from about 800 to 1,200 square feet. So in terms of looking at their requested zoning amendment, as we go through the zoning process, there's a series of questions that we typically want to ask of the application to assess, consistency. The first one is the suitability of the proposed development in view of the use and development of adjacent property nearby. This property, it has no frontage on State Route 24 or any of the major roads. It's tucked back behind. It's accessed off of, I believe it's Presidential Circle, Tree Lane, those sort of internal roads there. It is surrounded on most sides by, on to the north and then to the east by a commercial development. You've got the Lowe's Superstore and then the big Target Power Center that's there. To the west of the site, it backs up to the city's city boundary. On the other side, in Gwinnett County, there is a single-family residential neighborhood zoned R100, so fairly large lot residential homes. And then to the south, it abuts a vacant property, which is actually the property under discussion in the Linwood development proposal, which is currently zoned RHOP 62CC for continuing care senior housing, age restricted. So that's the setting for that. So in view of that, would multifamily residential be suitable on this property versus looking at commercial development? It provides a transition. Commercial is a higher intensity land use than residential multifamily. Sort of go down the series from commercial being one of your most intense land uses, and you look into your office and your institutional, then into your residential, so multifamily on down to sort of estate residential. So if we're looking at wanting to create transitions in the city, which is one of the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan, was having sort of smooth transitions, a multifamily residential would provide a transition for the property. So it's not inconsistent in that sense with the comprehensive plan. Would the development affect the existing use or usability of adjacent or nearby properties? It would not. There's nothing with the development of this property for multifamily that would preclude the redevelopment of any of the properties along the commercial properties along State Route 124, the office property to the north, the vacant property to the south. It wouldn't have an impact on that. And with proper screening and buffering, it could be having a reduced impact on any housing that would butt across the city boundary. As far as the impact on the appearance of the city, the property is not visible from a major roadway, so that would be fairly limited. However, the elevations for the proposed buildings have not been submitted yet, so once those are submitted, that can much better be evaluated in terms of aesthetics. Again, impact on thoroughfare congestion or traffic safety, they have not yet submitted a traffic study, so we can't speak to that at this point without knowing sort of their trip generation and impact on intersections proposed. Again, the impact on population density and overcrowding and urban sprawl, they are currently reworking their site plan, so we don't know what their final numbers are going to be able to evaluate in that standpoint in terms of how it might increase population or that nature. In terms of provision of water, sewage, transportation, and other urban services, the responses that we've had from Gwinnett County, there is water and sewer available to the site. Gwinnett County DOT had some, sort of basic recommendations in terms of transportation improvements for the site, left turn in, left turn out, those sorts of things. Or left-hand turn lanes, pardon me, right in, right out. But again, without the traffic study, we can't very adequately speak to those. So then in terms of looking at consistency with the land use plan or comprehensive plan, the proposed development is inconsistent with the character area description for the north Scenic Highway North character area, or 124 North character area. However, beyond that character area, when we get into the goals and policies included in the comprehensive plan, it does meet the intent of many of those. So it's sort of a weighing factor as you look at the two of those applying each other. In terms of consistency with the comprehensive plan, some of the implementation strategies for the character area are to improve interparcel access between developments. This would provide some through between developments to the south to developments to the north. It also would create pedestrian connections throughout the area, which would be promoting that connectivity. Enhancing pedestrian connections between commercial uses and adjacent residential uses by placing the residences in proximity to the commercial. You could have those trips done by walking or by biking, not necessarily by car. So it supports in that respect. As I mentioned before, it would provide a transitional zone from the higher intensity commercial to the lower intensity residential. Looking at some of the housing policies included in the comprehensive plan, the idea of providing recreational and green space areas with an easy access as many subdivisions as possible, pedestrian access included in all instances where new housing and parklands are developed. Because of the nature of the site, there would be a lot of open space areas to it, which would be creating green space and could be accessible to the residents of the site and to others who wanted to access it. So in terms of where we are with the brand property, based on the information they've submitted, we can have done some preliminary analysis in terms of the land use and the consistency with the comprehensive plan. They would need a land use amendment to move forward in order to be consistent with the comp plan, and that land use amendment there's support for it within the comp plan in terms of policies and goals. The vision statement for the applicable character area is not in support of it, but once they have revised their site plan and provided additional information, additional analysis can be done for the brand property. Are there any questions on that before I move on to Linwood?
Questions for Ms. Hill on the brand property only? Okay.
Okay.
Ms. Hill, can you pull the red microphone down a little bit?
Sure thing.
And maybe just restate the last part of the recommendation you made?
In terms of the brand property, the initial assessment based on what they have submitted to date would show that it would require a future land use plan amendment to move forward. They would need to change the future land use for the property in order to then proceed with a zoning change. That future land use amendment is inconsistent with the vision statement for the applicable character area. However, it is consistent with a number of the implementation strategies for the character area, as well as other housing, commercial, economic development implementation strategies and policies contained within the comprehensive plan. So it's sort of, we're waiting for additional information to see if that can, facilitate a more robust analysis.
Have you been indicating to them that they've given you a time when you're going to receive that information?
Jason, I know you've been in contact with them.
Yes, sir. We've been in contact with the applicant. They're aware that we need to have this additional information basically beginning of the month so we can do the process with them through the Planning Commission. And at that time, Megan will pick up the analysis again and complete it when we get that information.
The beginning of the month, meaning beginning of October?
Correct.
Because this is not on a Planning Commission agenda till the end of October? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So you should have it in 3 weeks.
that's what we're looking forward to move forward on that one. The Linwood development, which is currently scheduled for this month's Planning Commission meeting. Again, as Jason noted before the meeting, they have submitted a revised site plan and a number of amendments to their original proposal, fleshing out specifically some of the variances that would be required.
Let me stop you right there, I'm sorry. So the one revised site plan we received by email this afternoon, have you had an opportunity to look at that?
The revision that was sent out today was more of their community vision package. It just shows some elevations, basic project overview, but we've been in receipt of the revised site plan for a couple of weeks now, so Megan does have everything.
So you're comfortable moving
Yes,
forward then today?
exactly. The revised site plan came in on August 26th, I believe. So it's been in hand for a good amount of time. And yes, we're going to put that up on the screen. Okay, so the proposal here is a residential development which would provide a mixture of housing types. There would be single-family detached residential lots, single-family attached townhome lots, and then multifamily buildings as well on the property. The site would be accessed from New Hampton Drive via Tree Lane and Ronald Reagan Parkway, and then also from Tree Lane via Presidential Circle and State Route 124. So there'd be access from 124 and then from Ronald Reagan Parkway into the site, which sort of bridges those two areas. The development also includes a number of recreational areas, specifically some amenity areas with pools, cabanas, and things of that nature. There is one in the area of the single-family and townhomes, and one in the area of the multifamily units. The land use action requested is to reclassify the future land use for the property from public institutional to multifamily residential. The multifamily residential future land use designation allows for, the density that they are requesting, which is 7.99 units per the acre, so right at that 8 unit per the acre. And the zoning codes associated with the multifamily residential area are RM, which is what they have requested for the rezoning, residential townhome lots, and RG 75, which is the city's smallest lot, single-family residential development. Currently, the property is vacant, undeveloped. Surrounding it to the north, again, we have Waterford Township, the single-family R100 neighborhood in Gwinnett County. To the south is Eastside Hospital and associated medical offices. To the east, again, it's the vacant property that Brand is looking at, which is currently zoned for business. And beyond that, there's a commercial development along State Route 124. To the west, again, south and west, the hospital and medical offices, and then across Ronald Reagan Parkway is Carrington Village, another single-family residential development. Currently, the future land use plan shows this as public institutional, and those are, areas for government, community facilities, institutional land uses, examples such as schools, city halls, courthouses, health facilities, i.e. the hospital, and the like, and the associated zoning with that is CI, civic institutional. The future development map designation for this is the Scenic Highway North character area, again the same character area that we were in for the other property, and the vision for that is to create a impressive gateway corridor into the city containing a mixture of land uses and the redevelopment of existing commercial properties to contain more offices, assisted living facilities, and senior-focused housing. So that's the stated vision in the comprehensive plan. Again, as I said, currently the site is predominantly vacant and undeveloped. It was previously platted for a single-family residential subdivision, a portion of it, where the single-family home lots are shown currently. There are about 18 lots platted. 2 were developed with single-family residences. One of the homes, 1430 Hamilton Drive, appears to be abandoned and boarded up, and the other, 1420 Hamilton Drive, would remain and would be an out parcel of the proposed development and buffered on either side. Again, with this previous platting, the site includes 3 constructed streets: New Hampton Drive, which would be the access point for the western portion of the proposed development, and then Hamilton Drive to the point just east of the second developed lot, and Smoky Hollow Court, which is how you access Hamilton Drive. The right-of-way for 3 others has been designated, but they will not be incorporated into the proposed development. So they're going to replat the streets for the development and not use what's currently on the books. Majority of the site is currently wooded. There's a small stormwater pond located on the northern boundary of the site, just north of Huntington Court, and a much larger pond along the eastern boundary of the site, which you can see here on the site plan. There's a very large pond right there. Here's the one up to the north there, and then there's another stormwater facility right against the entrance to the proposed development. One thing to point out, sort of as a note on the application, it has been proposed that the requested land use, i.e. multifamily, will allow for a quality master plan with mixed uses. It will provide a mix of different residential types, but in the context of the comprehensive plan, mixed uses would mean more than one major land use types on a property, i.e. if we had commercial with the residential or office and commercial, that's what is meant and intended by mixed use in the comprehensive plan. This is a mixed product development, if you will. And again, like we found with the Brand property, the comp plan provides both support for the proposed rezoning, and there are some things that are consistent, namely the vision for the character area, again, is focused on redevelopment of commercial properties, and the housing that is mentioned is senior housing, which is what the site is currently zoned for with the RHOP 62 continuing care zoning. However, again, there are policies to support it. The implementation strategies for the Scenic Highway North character area are again to improve interparcel access between developments. With this site being in such close proximity to the hospital and then to the commercial uses to the south of it, there are proposed pedestrian connections between the site. Again, this could be used, in terms of accessing employment options at both of these, and then also for accessing the services. Again, one of the land use policies is to strive for a balanced distribution of land uses within the city by encouraging compatible land uses and the utilization of transitional zones and buffers between residential and non-residential development. Because of where this is situated, it would create a buffer between the commercial and the institutional and office development, which are considered higher intensity land use classifications, and the lower intensity Waterford Township located to the north of it. Committing to create walkable, safe, and attractive neighborhoods throughout the community that facilitate movement without the use of a car. The proximity to the supportive commercial and office and medical facilities speak to that sort of connectivity on a walkable scale by positioning residential houses or primary residences in proximity to that. looking at ways to eliminate attempts to regulate housing that would establish specific economic, racial, or ethnic mixtures within the community. Because of the mixture of housing types included in this, it would be accessible to a range of different households and different income types, so it would be in support of sort of promoting that diversity within the community. And as I said, currently the site's currently zoned and intended to be developed for senior housing. And this is where we get into sort of, again, that sort of dynamic of, well, it is consistent and it is inconsistent. The proposed development would not be age restricted like the RHOP 62 district requires. However, again, this is where we see that transition from sort of where we were in 2006 to where we are today. When we look at senior housing and kind of the advent of it, back in 06, when we were sort of on that bleeding edge of the baby boom, there was a lot of interest in age-restricted senior communities. Then through the recession, it was found that, well, by age-restricting those developments, there tend to be some unintended consequences in terms of resale and actually market absorption of them. Additionally, now that we're moving into sort of the first wave of retirements of the baby boom, we're seeing that predominantly about 90% of seniors, if given the opportunity, would prefer to age in place rather than moving to a designated community. Additionally, especially sort of the higher socioeconomic groups of retirees are looking for communities that offer close proximity to goods and services. Are looking for walkable communities and things of that nature, not so much sort of the isolated pocket of predominantly senior housing. So we've seen sort of a shift in that market over the past 5 years. So looking at that, by one of the strategies for housing policy in the comprehensive plan is to provide for an aging population through better health care, additional senior services, and housing alternatives. This would speak in support of this development in terms of the range of housing options provided within it and the access directly to health care and other goods and services. Another housing strategy is to provide affordable housing options for the city's workforce and consider incorporating multi-income housing units in new subdivisions. The range of housing types provided here would hit on a number of different sort of price ranges. It would offer both ownership and rental opportunities, so it would sort of promote that diversity of affordable options within the city. Some additional considerations is that if approved, the future land use amendment would take one of only a handful of undeveloped properties that meet the criteria for the RHOP 62 zoning from the pool of developable properties in the city. So really only those properties that are right adjacent to the hospital meet the criteria for that zoning district. So to rezone this would take one out of that pool. So that's something to think of. And again, there's very little vacant or developable land in the city of Snellville. At the time of the comprehensive plan, it was about 6%. Jason has told me that currently we're seeing about 4% developable land. This is a 45-acre parcel. It's a fairly large parcel. So, and in rezoning it to the multifamily residential, it would take the potential use from the pool of employment producing acreage in the city, which would be consistent with OI zoning, which is consistent with the current future land use designation of public institutional. So that's sort of another thing to consider when looking at this, because again, that was one of the policies of the comprehensive plan was to support the employment growth in the city and employment producing land uses. So it's that, there's a lot of push-pull going on within the comprehensive plan as related to this proposal. Again, earlier I spoke of, the process for amending comprehensive plans, and, support for amending a comprehensive plan, can be drawn from, demographic and economic changes over a course of time. And just to give a sort of a highlight of some of the demographic changes in Snellville between 2007 and 2012, which was the most recent data available from the Census Bureau, there's been about a 7% increase in population, about a 2% drop in population under 18, a 4% increase in population over 62, a 9% increase in total housing units, but a 4% increase in vacancy of units. And I think that speaks directly to sort of the housing bubble and the recession. We had a lot of units built, but then they, weren't occupied. That's been the same across the metro area. And then there's also been about a 5% drop in both the median and the mean income in the city over that period of time. And again, that's consistent with what we've seen across the metro area, but some things to consider. The request for rezoning to the RM property, or the RM district for this property, it is a complex rezoning. Because of the proposed development, including 3 different housing types, there is not currently a zoning district available in the city of Snellville that easily provides for that. The RM district does allow for single-family, townhomes, and multifamily dwellings in the same development, but the current standards of that district are written much towards a true multifamily, apartment community. Because of that, to move forward with the site plan, a number of variances and stipulations would need to be considered. Among these would be, just to highlight some, a reduction in lot size for single-family residences. Right now, it's 15,000 square feet for a single-family residence in RM as well as in R75. That's kind of the smallest lot we can get to in the city. However, the 5,000 square foot lots that they are proposing, just for comparison, Gwinnett County allows for lots down to about 7,200 square feet within their R60 zoning. And then they also have their TND, or Traditional Neighborhood District zoning, which allows 5,000 square feet for some lots, so long as there is a diversity of 3 different categories of lot size within the development. However, within TND, you can have the variety of single-family lot sizes and townhomes, but you cannot have multifamily. And that's, again, sort of what we're seeing as we go through the zoning. And it really, I looked at Norcross's zoning, Suwannee's zoning, Duluth's zoning, the county's zoning, kind of our neighbors. And in all instances, there's the ability to do townhomes and single-family, and townhomes and multifamily. But it's only within some of the specific mixed-use categories where all 3 products are allowed. But in that case, the multifamily is typically located over office or commercial uses. So it's, again, bringing in that, 1 or 2 or more major land use categories into those situations. However, as we look across the metro area, there have been a number of successful small lot residential, single-family residential developments. One, similar to the one proposed here that I'm familiar with, has lots in the 3,500 to 4,500 square foot range, and has been very successful. So that's sort of speaking to one of the major sort of things with this zoning requirement. And again, what's really happening here is that there's not really a district that speaks to this. So in terms of options that are available for moving forward with this amendment, in terms of, if there was the inclination to move forward with the development, it could move forward along a path of variances and stipulations, or it can move forward along a path of amending the future land use plan, amending the verbiage to include a designation of mixed residential types for the character area, and then creating a new zoning district that would allow for that, written to provide for that all within the same district, which would then be consistent with the character area. So it's, a choice there in terms of, how you would want to proceed along routes if you were inclined to approve the development. In terms of, other options, of course, when looking at a rezoning application, council has the ability to approve with stipulations and conditions, deny, and also you can approve but limit the proposed land use categories or development types. So that's another option on the table, is that you can look at, what's proposed here and, make some sort of limitations on it as a, process for approval. That's a summary of the Linwood property. I can certainly take any questions that you have about specifics on the proposal.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Going back to your employment producing aspect according to 2030. Currently, if I'm understanding this right, it was a mixed use zoning. Now it's a mixed product. That's what you say. And they're going from mixed use, which would be commercial, office, and residential, to strictly residential with different product types: single family, townhouse, and multifamily. Correct?
The current zoning for the property, the RHOP 62CC, allows for senior age restricted housing in a variety of types, single family, detached, single family attached, multifamily, and it does allow for a measure of supportive retail use. Okay. But it's subordinate to the residential use, versus if you look at some of the mixed use zoning categories available in the county per se, they will say, okay, you need to have a mixture of 2 or more land uses, and no one land use can be less than 20% or more than 40%. It's sort of, they're seen as in conjunction with each other, not subordinate to each other.
But the RHOP that currently doesn't have that restriction as far as percentage of supporting retail or supporting office as opposed to the residential.
Let me look that up for you real quick. I'm not sure of that offhand.
I don't know that there's a specific percentage.
There's not? Okay.
But there is, in the 2008 approved rezoning conceptual site plan, there is 51,000 square feet of medical office space. And there's also, the age in place, this senior type, there would be assisted living there too, which has somewhat of a commercial element too.
Well, going back to that 51,000 feet of medical office space, was that passed prior to the east side expansions? I mean, hasn't East Side's expansions with their offices and all that, hasn't that eaten into that 51,000? Perhaps
That
not.
wasn't included in that 51,000. It
Okay,
was
so that was all planned in a,
The
Over
East
and
Side
above.
expansion was not considered at the time that the CRCC was passed, but it did not take up any of the land where the 51,000.
no, I understand that. What
But
I'm
it
just
was
saying
not- it
though
was
is
not
that,
on- It was not considered
Right.
at that time. It was
Okay.
not, council wasn't aware of the East Side expansions at that time.
okay, I guess that's my point, is that 51,000, there wasn't an East Side expansion at that time.
No.
So there was a need for medical office space at that time, because it didn't have it. Am I right? Or, I wasn't
No.
here, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, and that wasn't really the theory for the office buildings to be part of the RHOP. The theory with having that space available there was to provide offices for doctors who may not have an actual practice located there, but they would come in one day a week and see patients, or to have a hair salon or a barber shop for the residents of that community. So those buildings were considered there really as more support for the residents of that development, not so much for outside services, and not in lieu of that the hospital didn't have enough room for these type of facilities. So it was really buildings and employment centers then for that residential community.
Thank you, that answers my question.
Exactly. I mean, the zoning ordinance designates them, without a specific percentage, but as accessory to the residential, and a use necessary for the operation or for the benefit and convenience of the residents of the facility.
Do you have other questions?
Yes, I have just one or two. You mentioned, and maybe Jason needs to answer this, but in Snellville, we currently have some housing developments with the 3,500 to 4,500 square foot lot sizes?
No, not
No, we
within
don't.
Snellville.
Okay.
No. There are definitely housing developments across the metro area that have that. A lot of these sort of small lot residentials typically range from about 3,500 to 4,500 square feet for the single-family lots. The county's ordinance that probably most closely mirrors what's being proposed here, that being their TND district, the traditional neighborhood district, that prescribes a range of different size categories for lots, the smallest of which goes down to that 5,000 square foot size.
Okay. Jason, do you know off the top of your head what the square footage, what the lot sizes are for like Stockton Walk? Or we could look those up.
Yeah, I know they're not that small. I would guess, 7 to 10 maybe.
Okay.
7 being the smallest, maybe that small, but probably 7,500, I would guess.
Okay.
And those and the other small ones would be Old Hickory and
They're just at 6 units an acre.
6 units an acre?
6 units an acre.
Okay,
Stock and walk acre.
okay,
no, I can research that for you.
okay.
An acre of we need 44,000 square feet for that. 6,000, 65,000 square feet lots. For the average, some of them larger, some of them smaller.
I do. One other question. As far as the walkability,
Yes.
if this were rezoned as the developer is requesting, one of the considerations in the comp plan is walkability. And in terms of comprehensive planning and downtown planning, potentially, I know there's some kind of rule of thumb for distances that people are willing to walk. And I just like to get the perspective of, in planning terms, what is that distance?
Certainly. And it ranges based upon the type of trip. Typically, and especially when we're talking about seniors or juniors, as I like to call children, we're looking at a quarter mile as being sort of, that's where we want to stop for those. For, teenagers, middle-aged, it really varies. A quarter mile for a non-essential trip. I feel like getting some ice cream. I'll walk around the corner and get some ice cream. If I've got a doctor's appointment, you can push that up to about, a third of a mile or so. And then, for recreation and those purposes, if I'm going to go walk to a park, or walk to a school, a half a mile. So it kind of depends on the age group and then also the purpose of the trip. But generally, everybody's happy with a quarter mile.
I'm guessing whether or not most of it's uphill or downhill.
Certainly, uphill both ways to school.
Megan, can I bring you back to the brand development, please?
Certainly.
I'm looking at the site plan.
Mm-hmm.
Do I understand that there's one entrance and one exit, or consider them just two entrances?
Yes, they revised their site plan to one entrance. My understanding is that was done because they have some significant site topography on that site. There's
I see that.
sort of bisected, as you can see up there, by streams. And they were originally proposing a northern exit to the site, but that was going to cut across a major stream corridor, so they brought that back. Again, I'm not sure where they're headed in terms of the revised site plan they may be submitting with the revised paperwork.
My concern is, and I think you answered the question, it's done, is going from this complex to Innsfield Drive. That's no longer, correct?
Yes, that's not proposed.
Thank you.
Oh, the Innsfield?
The first site plan showed an additional drive to connect to the Lowe's driveway on the side of Snellville Commons to the north and across that stream, a stream crossing. They've never turned in an application that shows a connection or proposed a connection to Innsville Drive.
No, they currently have an existing easement that provides access there.
At Innsfield?
At Innsville, yes, they have an access point there. They have a right of way, but they have not proposed using that to access the site.
I was mistaken on that, because when I very first looked at the first plan that they submitted, I thought I saw a road there, but I must have just seen the access, the easement access that they had on there.
There's a piece of property that is, contiguous there that does show an old drive, but there's no proposed access there.
Yeah, I do. Are you done?
Go ahead.
Do we go back to Linwood?
Sure.
Is there any interconnectability between the single-family townhome area and the apartment area?
Not as currently shown on their site plan.
Either driving or walking?
Walking, there is connectivity through the open space areas. However, driving there is not, though if you look at the northern section of the property there, you can see the roadway that comes through the residential and the townhomes, and you can see where that aligns with the circulation and parking area for the multifamily.
Right. yeah.
And
But I just don't know what the
that
topography
could
is
certainly be a
between them.
recommendation, is to create the connectivity there, so then there's two entry and access points, so that you would have, basically access sort of north and east up to 124, and then south and west down to Ronald Reagan. And also, as part of this development, there is the improvement proposed for the roundabout and new access to Ronald Reagan Parkway, right there at Tree Lane. I got that. I've got the plan in front of me. I'm sorry.
That's a city project.
Right.
I was looking more at the walkability, because a quarter mile is only 1,320 feet. That's not very far, and it looks to me like you can walk a quarter mile before you get anywhere. You'll still be inside the development area.
I think depending on where you are in the development.
Right, yeah, but there's a
I mean,
lot
the
of it
single
that-
families have direct access to the medical offices and the hospital. The multifamily has fairly good access to the commercial properties.
I'm sorry, David, are you done? I didn't mean, okay. You didn't talk about traffic impact with Linwood.
Yes. There has been a traffic analysis submitted for this development. However, what was submitted is really just a comparison of trip generation from the previously proposed development to the currently proposed development, and it doesn't provide any level of analysis of the impact of the proposed development on the surrounding roadway network in terms of, you know, how is it going to impact the level of service or the congestion measure, if you will, on the surrounding roadways. So it is definitely a recommendation that a sufficient traffic analysis be provided so that can adequately be assessed.
And has that been requested?
It was made aware to the applicant that,
I'm sorry?
it was communicated to the applicant that, you know, exactly what Megan just said, that this was.
Okay, so they're aware of that. Okay, that's honest, I think.
Ms. Hill, do you have an actual list of recommendations for the Linwood development property?
Yes, I will state that, you know, it is not exhaustive as we are still waiting, especially on that traffic analysis, which, you know, will have some impact on it. I can, let me find the correct page here. So, you know, as I mentioned, there are a number of variances that have been proposed by the applicant for the, consistent with the proposed site plan. We discussed the reduction in the single-family residential lot sizes to the 5,000 square feet. I think that is consistent with small lot sizes that are seen across the metro Atlanta region. I think it's consistent with what the county is striving to do in their T&D district. So that would not be, it would be a reasonable variance. The reduction in lot widths, right now the RM district requires 100 feet lot width. That would just, you know, apply across the board. And with the townhomes, the current townhome district, the RTH, does not have a minimum lot width. It does, however, have a minimum unit width, which is 22 feet. This is also the same on the county level. They are proposing to stipulate 22-foot wide units, so I think that would be a reasonable variance based on the consistency. There's a request for a reduction in lot width for the single-family detached lots from the 100 feet again, that's required by RM, to 50 feet. And, you know, it's a reasonable request based upon other, you know, requirements for single-family residential development. So that would not be inconsistent. Reduction of the front yard requirements for the single-family residences and townhomes, which currently RM requires 50 feet for the front yard, for single family, and and the townhomes, and they're proposing to reduce that to 20 feet for single family and 10 feet for the townhomes. And, again, it's a reasonable request. The Gwinnett County TND district, which allows for those 5,000 square foot lots, prescribes a front yard setback of 5 to 15 feet. Your current RTH townhome zoning allows for a front yard of 10 feet. So again, it's consistent with what's being done for like type developments. The reduction in side yards from 20 feet to 5 feet for the single family detached residences. Currently, the R75 district requires 10-foot side yards or 20 feet between structures. And a reduction in the side yard is reasonable. However, a distance of 20 feet between the structures, i.e. 10 feet and 10 feet, is preferred, for the sake of, fire control and consistency with what's being done elsewhere in the city. So I think there's some consideration there. Obviously, with this property, there are large buffer considerations, especially with the adjacent property to the north. Currently, the current zoning for RM would require a 25-foot setback and buffer. They have proposed a 25-foot setback and a 50-foot, pardon me, I have that mixed up, 25-foot undisturbed buffer, 50-foot setback. And this is fairly consistent with what Gwinnett County provides for buffering their R100 to their higher intensity residential districts. In their case, they then require an additional 5-foot setback inside the 50-foot buffer. That might be a consideration of an additional stipulation on that. But the provision of the 50-foot buffer is above and beyond what is currently required by RM zoning and is consistent with, or largely consistent with what the county requires in the same situations. There's a number of other variances, again, related to, setbacks and yard widths. And this really stems from the fact that the RM district sort of treats any type of housing product the same and doesn't provide any fluctuation, or variance between them. So I think looking to what your current townhome district requires is certainly reasonable. On that end, I think looking at what Gwinnett County requires for some of their smaller lot single-family residences provides good guidance in that respect for the variance requests of that nature. Another thing to touch on is the architecture proposed for the development. Per the requirements of the RM district, they must submit elevations for all of the front, side, and rear typical units, including proposed building materials. And to date, what they have submitted for those elevations is consistent with the city's architectural guidelines, which are section 7.7. My recommendation would be to ensure consistency. It's just stipulated that their design and materials will meet the requirements of that section. There's quite a large amount of these. I can continue to
Is
read
there
through
something,
them.
I guess, is there something, because right now you're telling us everything reasonable, is there something that you found is unreasonable? Maybe that may be easier.
Certainly. Parking. I think that there is some room for discussion on the parking between what they're proposing, what's required by your current ordinances. I think there's probably some sort of meeting point there on that. They are requesting relief from the parking requirements of the RM zoning district, which requires off-street parking spaces totaling no less than 2.5 times the number of dwelling units, with all units having at least a single car, or a single car garage provided for all units. So basically, this would mean a total of 903 parking spaces, with 361 of them being located in garages. Yes. Mm-hmm. No, as your ordinance, and again, this is where we get into that issue of sort of RM treats everything the same, even though it allows for this diversity. As it's written, it would be interpreted to mean a single car garage per each unit, so 361 single car garages.
They don't have to be attached to the unit.
No, they do not. And it doesn't mean that they have to be, that the single car garages have to be for the multifamily. You can use them up as 2-car garages, if you will, on the single family and the townhomes, which is essentially what they have proposed to do, with the multifamily parking being, a surface lot. So if you were looking at, what your parking regulations are otherwise for these types of developments, we'd be looking at 2-car garages for each single family and townhome unit, and 1 space per bedroom in the multifamily units. And this would result in a total of 605 parking spaces versus the 903. Essentially 120 spaces associated with the single family, 136 associated with the garages for the townhomes, and then based on their unit split for the multifamily, which is 60% 1-bedrooms, 30% 2-bedrooms, 10% 3-bedrooms, 140 spaces, 140 spaces, 69 spaces, getting up to that 605. Their plan proposes 841 total parking spaces. I would contend that this is reduced to 705 if the driveway spaces associated with a single family are taken out. And then, so reducing the parking requirement to what is required per your current parking requirements for the associated development types would result in requiring 722 parking spaces, with 466 of them for the apartments, which would be 33 more spaces for the apartments than 33 more spaces for the apartments than they have proposed, but less spaces overall. If you go by their 841 number, if you go by the 705 number, it's kind of a wash, a few more spaces. So I think you can get to a reasonable variance on that. I think looking at the parking requirement is reasonable. I think it's a matter of which way you want to go about it. You could probably go about it, a couple of different ways to get to the same number. How do you want to do your math?
You started to read the variances that they're requesting, but I think the question more directly was what restrictions what are your recommended restrictions?
Okay. Again, I'll preface the discussion by saying that we don't have the traffic analysis, so that, certainly has not been taken into consideration on
Let's
this.
just put it then, what about your restrictions based on the information you have today?
Yes, exactly, yeah. Okay, well, no, that's not, let me go to, there we go, stipulations. Okay, so I would recommend stipulating that the property would be developed in accordance with the submitted proposed site plan dated 8/25/14. So, if you were to grant the RM rezoning, it would be tied to this specific site plan. It would be conditioned upon the site plan. With any modifications that would be required to meet any conditions of state, county, or other city regulations. Of course, we could come into some on, sidewalk requirements, construction requirements, other things of that nature that haven't been assessed as part of my work. And that any substantial variation from the concept plan as determined by the Director of Planning and Development would require mayor and council approval. So if they want to make anything more than a minor adjustment to it, it would have to come back before.
Let me stop you right there because we've had that issue in the past. Is there any definition as to what is substantial and what is minor?
That varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I could certainly make a recommendation for that with, some additional research on the topic to see what would be reasonable for Snellville based on your current zoning ordinance. And that's a question that comes up a lot on that one. And then any non-substantial variances would be determined by the Director of Planning and Development, and they must be submitted in writing for administrative approval, and must have administrative approval for moving forward for minor ones. Again, with the 50-foot setback, I would suggest requiring that additional 5 feet from that, consistent with what Gwinnett County requires for, similar zonings, just for consistency on that point. For connectivity purposes, I would recommend stipulating that the roadway between the single family and the multifamily connect through to provide connection through the development. Also the same for any trails. I would suggest requiring any internal trails and sidewalks to connect to those off-site as well, in proximity to the development to further the connectivity goals. That all internal streets, regardless of public or private, would be built to Gwinnett County DOT standards with maintenance bonds provided. This is already a current requirement, but I would stipulate it in the conditions of zoning that prior to the issuance of a development permit, the applicant would submit a plan book to the Director of Planning and Development for approval. That would be the elevations, materials, design, and things of that nature. There's been some discussion about the open space on the site, and the current open space calculation includes 50% of the stormwater areas, which can be done under the city's current open space requirements, as long as those stormwater detention areas are maintained as permanent lakes. So it's stipulated that they be maintained as permanent lakes if they are included in the open space calculation for the site. So that's recommendations if we were to, move forward with approval of the current site plan. Again, the council has a number of options that can be explored when reviewing the proposed development. You can certainly add conditions and stipulations of your own. And again, you can also explore options such as, having it withdrawn without any consequence, so that you could be directed to, revise the future land use category and then write a consistent zoning ordinance. That process could be done rather quickly if that was a desired route to go. And you can also explore the option of, putting additional requirements on the mix and types of units provided on the site. So it's there are many things, within the current land use plan and planning guidance for the city of Snellville that support this, and there are a number of things that are inconsistent with it. So it's,
If you had to weigh that, would you say it's 50-50, 60-40, 30-70? What would you?
I would say it's about dead even. Based on what your current guidance provides, it is not a clear-cut case.
We have a letter, I don't know if you're aware of it, from the County Planning and Development Department. And it says specifically, we urge the city to reject the applications as submitted. And I'd like to get your feel for what you feel about that.
Without any reasoning behind that recommendation, I can't provide a response or a credible one.
Okay.
Additional questions for Ms. Hill? Jason, do you have that letter? You can maybe provide her a copy from the county.
It says that it suggests a less intensive detached residential. He can give you the letter.
Okay.
Ms. Hill, I apologize. You should have corrected me earlier.
Completely understand. It happens all the time.
Any other questions? The Linwood development will come in front of the Planning Commission on September 23rd for a public hearing. It will be on the first meeting in October of the Mayor and Council for a first reading, and will come in front of the Mayor and Council on October 27th for a public hearing. The Brand development will come in front of the Planning Commission on October 28th for a public hearing, and then it will appear on the Mayor and Council's agendas in November. So the time is 7:20. We've come to the end of our agenda. We will adjourn. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Have a safe trip home. Thank you.